Good evening, everyone, and welcome back. It has been a while since we've been able to gather like this, and it feels amazing to finally be back here at the Irvine Barclay Theater. My name is Michael Yassa. I'm Director of the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you all to the third annual McGaugh-Gerard Distinguished Lecture on Learning and Memory. First of all, just by show of hands, I'm going to pretend like I can see you even though the house lights are down. How many of you have never been to one of our distinguished lectures before? This is your first time. Okay. Lots of first-timers. And again, by show of hands, how many of you have never been to the Irvine Barclay Theater before? Okay. Lots of first-timers. This is great. So I think you'll all agree this is a spectacular venue. And we have been very, very fortunate to partner with the Irvine Barclay Theater for so many years now. And really just a spectacular gem of the Orange County community. And we're delighted to be back here after a long several years because of the pandemic. Now I want to thank the new president of the Irvine Barclay Theater, Dr. Craig Singer, for his continued partnership with us, and the entire Barclay team for all of their support with this event. Let's please give them all a round of applause. I also want to thank the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory staff, our student ambassadors, our volunteers, and everyone who worked tirelessly to make sure that you have a great time this evening. Let's give them all a round of applause. Now, some of you may know this history, but our public lecture series is long-standing. It has started here in the year 1995. And the mission behind these lectures, even over all of these years, has not changed: to bring neuroscience discoveries to everyone in our community. Now, this particular lecture series that you're here for today is truly special. The McGaugh-Gerard Lecture Series only started a few years back, just because, in addition to having our long-standing distinguished lecture, this lecture series holds a special place near and dear to our hearts. It is supported by a generous endowment from the Ralph Gerard Estate, and from none other than Dr. James L. McGaugh, one of our founding faculty here at UC Irvine. Oh, you'll hear more about Dr. McGaugh, don't worry. As many of you know, Dr. McGaugh was the founding chair of the very first Department of Neuroscience in the world here at UC Irvine in 1964. Hang on, there's more. He was also the founding director of the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, the very first Learning and Memory Institute in the world in 1983. And it was his pioneering vision in 1995 that brought this distinguished lecture series to life. So Dr. McGaugh is here with us tonight, and I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge all of his accomplishments, his generosity, and his vision. Big round of applause for Dr. McGaugh. Now, I have a couple of questions for you. How many of you have ever had an aha moment where something you didn't understand before suddenly all connected and you finally figured it out? How many of you have had that experience before? Okay, I think a lot of us have, right? Now, how many of you have ever wondered why that happens? What happens in those moments when your brain connects the dots? That seems like a very magical thing. But behind this magic, there's science. And that's the kind of thing that we're going to explore today. We're fortunate to be joined by a remarkable scientist whose research gets to the heart of these questions and so many more. But before I turn to our esteemed speaker, I want to take a moment tonight to highlight the important work of the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory. If you look at the back of your program, you'll see some information about the CNLM and the critical global challenge that we are trying to address. Over 3 billion people worldwide are struggling with a brain disorder. From Alzheimer's disease, to stroke, to depression, to anxiety, to PTSD. Disorders that are very difficult to understand and even more difficult to treat, owing to the complexity of the brain. Now, Dr. McGaugh always reminds us that the human brain is the most complicated machine in the known universe. Research at our center is focused on understanding this brain, this complex machine, so that we can find solutions that will change people's lives for the better. We're proud to offer events like this to the public, free of charge, but it's important to know that the vital work that we do depends on the support of individuals like you. Every contribution, no matter the size, helps fuel the research that we do here to lead to new discoveries and new treatments. So if you feel moved by tonight's talk or by the work that we do, I encourage you to scan the QR code in the back of your program and make a contribution. Each donation helps us get one step closer to better understanding the brain and improving the lives around us. Okay, now let's talk about the remarkable scientist you're about to meet. She is a world-renowned psychologist and neuroscientist who's truly shaped the way that we think about emotions in the brain. She's a distinguished professor at Northeastern University and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and a recipient of way too many awards to list here. But what I admire most about her is her dedication to making science not only understandable, but interesting to the public. Sir Francis Bacon once said that knowledge is power, and we know that with great power comes great responsibility. And as academics, we have a responsibility to take our academic work and distill it in a way that is accessible to our communities, a way that the public can relate to and understand. Our speaker this evening takes this responsibility very, very seriously. Her books, including How Emotions Are Made, and her latest 7.5 Lessons About the Brain, which is also outside if you'd like to pick up a copy, have brought cutting-edge neuroscience to people all around the world. Now, her work goes beyond the academic. It's accessible, it's thought-provoking, and perhaps most importantly, it's fun. She has a gift for weaving complex ideas into stories that help us better understand our lives and help us better understand the world around us. So without further ado, it is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce to the stage the brilliant, the inspiring Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Good evening, everybody. It is a real pleasure and a distinct honor to be here this evening. And I'm simulating all of your shining faces smiling at me right now. What I'm going to do over the next 40 minutes with you is introduce 3 insights about the brain that are somewhat counterintuitive. What I've done is I've broken the lecture tonight into 3 parts. The first part is necessarily the longest part, and the other 2 lessons, so the first lesson is necessarily the longest part. It's going to take about half the lecture, and then the other 2 will follow very quickly. They really build on the first 2. And to start, I always like to acknowledge the generations of lab members who contributed to the work that we're going to talk about this evening, as well as the 2 other directors of our laboratory, Dr. Karen Quigley, who is standing beside me there, and Dr. Jordan Terrio, who is the newest director to join the lab. And I also want to acknowledge the generous funding agencies that make it possible for me to be here with you this evening. So the first lesson really stems from a question that I started asking a number of years ago, which is, what is the brain for? Like, why do we even have a brain? It's a very expensive organ. It's the most expensive organ we have in our entire bodies. It's about 20% of our metabolic budget. So what is the most important job of the brain? The usual suspects that we hear are things like thinking or intelligence or maybe rationality. These answers derive from an idea that we have 3 brains in one called the triune brain. And I'm going to have to ask you, since I can't see your raised hands, I'll ask you to clap. Who here has ever heard of the triune brain? How about the idea that you have a lizard brain? Right, okay. So the idea of the triune brain is that your brain evolved and functions in 3 layers. The first layer for instincts that supposedly we inherited from ancient reptiles. That's your lizard brain. And then there's a layer for emotions called the limbic system, which supposedly evolved from ancient mammals. And then a layer for thinking, the cerebral cortex, which is relatively large in primates, including us humans. Now, in this view, your brain is a battleground between your inner beast, that is your lizard brain and your limbic system, versus your rational self, for control of your behavior. If your rational self wins, then you are a moral, well-adjusted, healthy person. And if your inner beast wins, then maybe you don't have very good self-control, maybe you're childish, maybe you're immoral or mentally ill. That's the narrative. This 3 brains in one can be traced all the way back to ancient Greece, and it remains very, very popular in the media, and in medicine, and in the law, and in economics, and unfortunately, in certain circles in psychology and in some corners of neuroscience, for example, the neuroscience of emotion. And as intuitive as it may sound, that we're constantly struggling between our urges and desires on the one hand and our rational thoughts on the other, there's one kind of tricky bit with this model, and that is that it's false. That's as a scientist, I always try to avoid the F word, false or fact, but I feel like I can go out on a limb on this one. If the human brain really evolved from reptile to rodent to primate in a linear fashion, then evolution would look something like this. But evolution isn't linear. It looks more like this, which means that mammals and reptiles both evolved from fish. We did not evolve from reptiles. Also, brains don't evolve in layers. Evolutionary biologists have known this for over 50 years. So the only animal on this planet with a lizard brain is a lizard, exactly. And your big cerebral cortex is not special. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not special. It's just about the size that would be expected for a primate of your size. So what is the deal with this model, like this idea? Why is it so sticky? And I think that there are several reasons, because there's never only one single answer to a complicated question like this. But for tonight, what I want to do is zero in on the idea that when crafting this narrative, scientists started with what was intuitive. They started with their own subjective experiences and then went searching for the biological basis of those experiences in the human brain and in the brain of other animals. And a more scientifically sound approach is to go in the other direction, which is really how our lab works. So we start with questions like, how did a brain like ours evolve? How does it develop? How is it structured? And then we can ask, okay, so given our ecology, the environment that we live in and that we make, what does this structure let us do? How does the brain create the thoughts and perceptions and feelings and so on that some people take to be the basis of human nature? This, I think, is the basis for understanding brain function, and so that's what we're going to do. And so to answer this question, particularly the question of how a brain's evolved, we have to go back about 550 million years, give or take, to a world that was ruled by creatures with no brains. Kind of like now, except that back then, creatures didn't actually need brains. So consider this little guy, the Amphioxus, or his common name is a lancelet. It has a tiny body with a few simple organ systems internally, virtually no systems to sense the outside world, so no eyes, no ears. Also, these little guys have no brain because they don't really need a brain. But over evolutionary time, animals' bodies got bigger and bigger. These larger bodies had more internal visceral systems to coordinate and control, systems to shuttle nutrients like oxygen and glucose, systems to eliminate waste. Animals also evolved new sensory organs like eyes and a lateral line system, which in humans, it contributes to became our ears, our hearings, the system for hearing, and for touch. And so with these new sensory systems, animals began to sense the world around them, which further perturbed these internal systems. And so, in short, as bodies became larger and more complicated, they needed a central command center to regulate them and coordinate them in a metabolically efficient way. And that's what a brain is. So consider right now, as you are sitting, I'm sure, in rapt attention to this talk, which your very own central command center, your brain, is regulating your very, very complex body. It's supervising over 600 muscles, balancing dozens of hormones that are coursing through your blood, which is pumping at a rate of 4 to 5 liters a minute. At the same time, your brain is regulating the energy of billions of cells. It's directing other organs that digest food, excrete waste, and fight illness. The scientific name for all of this drama that the brain is regulating is allostasis, not to be confused with homeostasis. That's a wink, wink to the neuroscientists in the audience. But we can think of this regulation like running a budget for your body. So this budget tracks water and salt and oxygen and glucose and all the other resources that you need to stay alive as you gain and lose them. And I should point out, body budgeting is a metaphor. All metaphors are false by design. They're simplifications. They are not scientific explanations. But some metaphors are really useful. And so this metaphor turns out to have really good traction. It doesn't capture everything about allostasis, but it captures the main points, which I want to bring to your attention this evening. So the body budgeting metaphor suggests that we can think about anything which replenishes resources, like eating and sleeping. We can think of them as like deposits into the budget. And anything that spends resources, like dragging yourself out of bed in the morning, your heart beating as you listen to this talk, the functioning of your immune system to protect you from viruses, these are like withdrawals. Some withdrawals, like exercising or learning something new, these are relatively more metabolically expensive withdrawals. They're investments, you can think of them, that pay dividends later. So your immune system, when it's working properly, is a good investment of metabolic resources. It's actually we have very expensive immune systems. Vertebrates have very expensive immune systems because they learn and they adapt. But when your immune system is in overdrive, that can be an unnecessary expense that can drain your budget. So it can act, like a pernicious kind of withdrawal. And persistent uncertainty is also another pernicious or difficult withdrawal that can drain your body budget, because persistent uncertainty makes it very, very difficult for your brain to make clear moment-to-moment plans for regulating the body. Anything that makes budgeting more efficient, you can think of as a savings, so like support from a loved one, for example. And anything that makes your budgeting less efficient, like social stress or loneliness or social isolation, is like paying a little tax. So here's a tidbit, right? If you are stressed within 2 hours of eating a meal, it costs you the equivalent of, it adds basically the equivalent of 104 calories to your meal. I think about this every morning when I read the newspaper as I'm eating breakfast. Do you know what 104 calories additional 104 calories just from inefficiency. Every meal for a year adds up to 11 pounds. We can talk about what that means in this election cycle later. The point that I'm trying to make here is that although this body budgeting metaphor is a simplification, it captures a key idea that running a body requires biological resources, and your brain is always guessing when to spend those resources and when to save them, and tuning its budgeting efforts along the way. Correspondingly, as the brain regulates and coordinates the systems inside the body, it also models the sensory state of the body, which is a process called interoception. Now, interoception, that's a mouthful because it's actually a scientific concept, but I'm mentioning it here because it's getting a lot of popular press these days in the wellness domain. Interoception is usually defined as your awareness of physical sensations, like your heart pounding in your chest. And supposedly, the story goes, that the more aware you are, the better off you will be. But that's actually not necessarily true. Not supported by evidence that link is not necessarily always the case. But more importantly, interoception is not about being aware of what's going on inside your body. Interoception is the brain's modeling of the sensory signals that arise from body budgeting. So your brain is always regulating and coordinating the systems of your body, and your body, the sensory surfaces of your body, are always sending back to the brain signals, sensory signals, about the energetic conditions of the body. And we feel that as mood. So what we call mood is linked to interoception and to body budgeting. You can think about your mood as a general barometer for your metabolic state. So all the drama going on inside your body continually sends these signals to your brain that manifest as simple feelings of pleasantness, unpleasantness, feelings of comfort or discomfort, feelings of fatigue or activation, feeling like worked up. So you can think about your mood as a quick and dirty summary of your metabolic status without much detail. It's like a cue to how your body is doing. And it's worth pointing out here that mood is not emotion. So because your brain is always regulating and modeling your body, mood is always with you at every moment of your life, whether you're emotional or not. So mood is a property of consciousness, even when you are not emotional and even when your mood is not in the forefront of your awareness. So when you're feeling pretty good, body budgeting is probably going pretty well. It doesn't mean that you're not spending anything. You could be running a mile, but it means that body budgeting is occurring in a metabolically efficient manner. When you feel like crap, like distressed or fatigued, really dragging, body budgeting is probably less efficient and you're probably running a deficit, which might mean that something is wrong. But it also might mean that you're just doing something really hard, like exercising, or sitting at 8 o'clock at night in a lecture hall, listening to, stuff you've probably not heard before, or maybe you're suspicious about. Or dealing with persistent uncertainty. That can be linked to persistent negative mood. Negative mood could simply be that you're sleep deprived or that you are dehydrated. And so here are a couple of examples of why this insight is important and how it changes our understanding of human nature. First, in our lab, we think about a depressed brain as a brain that is dealing with a catastrophic body budgeting deficit, basically a bankrupt brain that is attempting to curb spending severely. And that's what the symptoms of depression are. They are the consequences of a brain that is attempting to reduce its spending, reduce movement, reduce learning and sensitivity to context changes in the world. There might actually be a metabolic problem in the body, which the brain is modeling, or it could be that the brain believes that there is a metabolic problem and lacks the resources to update its model. Serotonin which is serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, common treatment for depression. Serotonin evolved as a metabolic regulator. So did dopamine. In fact, every single neurotransmitter that we know about in the brain has metabolic consequences, metabolic effects that it is involved in. Here's a second implication. Evidence repeatedly indicates that you will be healthier and live years longer if you have close, trusting relationships. Why? Why is this effect manifest? Well, one reason might be that trusted friends and loved ones provide a metabolic savings. They help ease your brain's body budgeting burden. If you have close, trusted relationships with others, and therefore receive body budgeting savings from them, you are less likely to get sick, and if you're already sick with a serious illness, such as cancer or heart disease, the evidence suggests that you are more likely to get better. Other evidence suggests that you will be more effective at work when you work with peers and managers whom you trust. With less metabolic burden, there's a savings in resources that can be invested elsewhere, like in taking risks or developing creative ideas or developing new ideas. And I should say that one of my former postdocs, Shir Etziel, who's at Hebrew University, just presented in our lab a couple of weeks ago, showing us evidence that if you perform the same task with a loved one present, actually you are much more metabolically efficient. in standard measures of metabolism, like looking at glucose metabolism. You're just more efficient. It costs less than if you are performing that task on your own. Humans regulate each other's body budgets, which is just another way of saying that we are social animals. For your whole life, outside of your awareness, other people create savings and taxes and sometimes even withdrawals in your body budget, and you return the favor. Whether they intend that effect or whether you do is irrelevant. It's just how we're wired as humans. And when you lose someone that you love, it feels like you lost a part of yourself, because you have. You've lost someone who's tended your body budget, and you feel that loss. You feel it physically. And here's one final implication that is hot off the press from my lab. So I have to, this is a neuroscience lecture, so even though everything I'm talking about, has data to support it. I'm not presenting the data, but I just have to present you one real brain image. This is an image that was generated from a ultra high resolution 7 Tesla MRI scanner, so it's a very powerful magnet that we use in our brain imaging work. And what I'm depicting here is a structure called the periaqueductal gray, or the PAG, which is a tiny little cylinder, deep in the midbrain, which is your lizard brain. The PAG is supposed to contain fight and flight circuits that are activated during threat. And much has been made about these fight and flight circuits, particularly in the media, as a way of explaining why a lot of us are feeling so weary and burned out after the COVID pandemic. The idea being that this unrelenting fear has just activated these circuits over and over and over again, causing us to just be exhausted and miserable. So in our lab, we looked at the PAG, we looked at its anatomy and its connections, and we think it's more justified to think of PAG neurons as regulating your autonomic nervous system all the time. So your autonomic nervous system is part of your peripheral nervous system that controls your cardiovascular system, your heart, your lungs, your gut, and so on and so forth. And not just during threat, but really all the time. And so we scanned people using this ultra high resolution 7 Tesla magnet while they completed a very, very simple memory task called an NBAC task. And in case you've never heard of this, I just want to show you how utterly trivial this task is. This task is easier than remembering a phone number, which for somebody at my age is actually not a trivial task, but for a lot of you it still is a trivial task. So here's the task. So we show a subject a letter like this. So this is the letter P. And then we show them in the next moment another letter, and we say, is that the same or different than the one you just saw? What is it, the same or different? Good job. And how about this? Same or different than the one you just saw? Same. Pretty trivial, right? Okay. This task is easier than, as I said, remembering a phone number, but this task gave the PhD a real workout, and most notably, it also changed heart rate and breathing rate. And for the neuroscientists in the audience, 7 Tesla imaging means that we can see the PhD at unparalleled precision, and we actually were able to kind of peel it like an onion and lay it out in a flat map, so we could see every single voxel separately. So we could actually map all of the subnuclei in the PhD. So that wasn't for civilians, that was just for the neuroscientists. Just to make the point that we looked really, really carefully at these data, and what we find is that the patterns of findings can't be explained by the idea that there are dedicated fight and flight circuits in the brain. The PAG neurons are regulating your autonomic nervous system all the time, even during mundane memory tasks. So in moments of threat, of course, those neurons are working really hard, but those neurons are not for flight or fight. So what accounts for the pervasive suffering that is being experienced at record levels today? An epidemic of depression and anxiety, not to mention a surge in metabolic illnesses like diabetes and heart disease and autoimmune illnesses. Well, if we look at this through the lens of the brain's most important job, then we might discover that we live in a world that is perfectly designed to burden and even bankrupt a human body budget. We've created a world in which the basics like food and shelter are not considered human rights, a world that is filled with persistent and very expensive uncertainty from economic inequality and upheaval, climate change, polarizing politics, wars, school shootings at record levels, social media, which you can't really escape from, and of course there's the COVID pandemic and its aftermath. So this is lesson number 1. Your brain's most important job is not thinking. It's not feeling. It's not even seeing or hearing or sensing in any way. Your brain's most important job is the regulation of your very, very complicated body. And it's easy to ignore this because we're not aware of all the drama going on. We are not wired to be aware of all the drama going on inside. If you even have a modicum of awareness of what is happening in your gut, you have my deepest sympathies. Yet everything your brain does, psychologically speaking, it's doing in the service of regulating your body. Now, of course, I don't experience myself that way. You probably don't experience every thought you have, every emotion every feeling you have that way. We don't experience every hug we give or receive, every kindness we extend, every insult we bear as having anything to do with metabolism or the brain's ability to efficiently regulate the body. But under the hood, that is what's happening. And an important implication here is that if we want to take more control over what we do and what we think and how we feel, if we want to be the kind of person who, is helpful to other people, gives other people savings to their body budgets instead of being somebody who adds taxes, then we have to consider the brain's most important job, body budgeting. Another really important implication here is that when we consider physical diseases like diabetes and cardiovascular disease, what we call mental illnesses like anxiety and depression, what we think of as neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, these all have body budgeting issues as a contributing factor. Like, I'm not reducing everything to metabolism or body budgeting. I'm really calling this out as a key influence that is largely ignored in the neuroscience of the mind. Here is lesson number 2. Your brain predicts your body's needs in advance. So to us, it kind of feels like, stuff's happening in the world. We detect stuff. Then we sense it, we perceive it, maybe we, process it, we might think about it, or, emotions and cognitions might, duke it out, and then we react to whatever's happening in the world. But even though this is the quality of our experience, it's the narrative that reflects our intuitions are never a good guide to how things work, right? So our experiences of the world are never a good guide to how those experiences are created. The most efficient way to regulate a body, or really any system, is to predict its needs in advance and correct those needs, correct those predictions when necessary. And in psychology and in neuroscience, we have a fancy name for correcting a prediction that is incorrect. It's called learning. So there are literally hundreds of published papers providing evidence for the predictive functioning of the brain. But right now, I'm just going to describe the gist of how the brain accomplishes prediction to the best of our knowledge with our lab's own theoretical twist. So this is the general idea using a cartoon example. Your brain creates actions and experiences by anticipating the upcoming needs of the body and attempting to meet those needs before they arise. That is the definition of allostasis, or body budgeting. The anticipating the needs of the body and attempting to meet those needs before they arise. So for example, when you go to stand up, your brain doesn't stand you up and then raise your blood pressure, because that would be metabolically expensive. Like falling and breaking a bone, very, very expensive. So as your brain is preparing to stand up your body, it also simultaneously raises your blood pressure, or even a little beforehand. So what the brain is doing is it's creating a bunch of guesses for what to do next. And for each guess, it's also predicting what you'll experience as a consequence of those actions. So as your brain prepares to change your heart rate and your breathing rate, or modulate the gush of cortisol into your blood, or move your head, or move your eyes, it's also predicting what you will feel and see and hear and smell and so on as a consequence of those movements. So you can think about these prediction signals as possible future actions, plans for action, and the predicted sensory consequences of those actions. And predictions are actually memories. Not just any memories, but memories that are similar in some way to the present. And all of this is happening outside of your awareness. You have no awareness of remembering anything. Now, at the same time as your brain is generating these predictions, sensory signals are arriving to your brain from the surfaces of your body, your retina and your eyes, your cochlea and your ears, and so on. The sensory surfaces inside sending signals up. These signals actually help to select the prediction signals that, in the next moment, become your actions, your movements, and your experience of yourself in the world, including your experience that you're detecting and reacting to events in a world that is objective and separate from you. So think about the last time you were thirsty and you drank a glass of water. Within seconds of draining that glass, you probably felt less thirsty. But the interesting thing is that it actually takes about 20 minutes for water to change the concentration of your blood, in your blood, of the osmolarity of your blood, and for the corresponding signals to reach your brain. So what relieves your thirst 20 minutes too early? The answer is prediction. Over a lifetime, your brain has had thousands of opportunities to learn that certain sensory and motor patterns involved in drinking cause you to no longer feel thirsty, and so that experience is manifest, 20 minutes too early. Now here is an interesting example that offers two important insights about prediction signals. First, I will wager that you have never actually seen electrical towers playing jump rope in real life, but you can understand that's what's happening here because your brain was able to combine bits and pieces of memories to make a completely novel prediction. In cognitive science, this is called conceptual combinations, taking bits and pieces of the past, combining it in new ways to make a completely novel prediction. But this example also demonstrates another really cool thing about the way that your brain is predicting. So who here can hear the towers as they hit the ground? And who can feel the thudding in their chest? If you can feel the thudding, or you can hear even just a little bit, like an echo, then your brain is changing the firing of its own sensory neurons in the absence of those sensory inputs, merely on the basis of this visual input. So this is an example of what your brain does every time it creates a prediction. Prediction signals are physical. When a brain predicts, it is changing the firing of its own neurons to anticipate sensory inputs, and in the process begins to construct experience before those signals arise. And if you want to know how to use this insight to plan an awesome birthday party for your kids, like a disgust party, which I discuss in one of my books, but also I did this for my daughter's 12th birthday party, so you'll become the best parent, aunt, grandparent in the world. Come and ask me afterwards. It's very powerful for creating birthday parties. So here's a second example that a lot of people have an easier time with. If you take a look at this traffic light, I actually can't see you, but raise your hand. Well, clap if you see the top light as red. Thank you. Now here are the lights again, this time with a filter over them. Who still sees the top light as red? Okay, well here's a really interesting thing. Your experience of red right now is completely caused by prediction signals in your brain, just like the vibrations from the jumping towers. Your brain is remembering red. And I know this because this is a cyan filter which blocks all wavelengths of light that neurotypical humans see as red. Now who sees it as red? Yeah. How about gray? Yeah, because it is, yeah, exactly. So this is lesson number 2. Your brain constructs your experiences, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, as it predictively controls your body. You don't sense the world, evaluate, and then react to the world. Your brain controls your body predictively, and in doing so, assembles sensory prediction signals that become your experience of yourself in the world, right? So you don't sense and then act. Your brain is preparing action, and as a consequence, you sense and experience. The third lesson today derives from the other two. Your experience of what is outside your head, in the world, and even in your own body, derives in part from the prediction signals inside your head. And for the most part, your brain does not make itself aware of this ongoing dynamic. So to give you an intuition for this, I'm using an image that will hopefully illustrate what happens when when your brain can't construct prediction signals. So if you take a look at this image, What do you see? You can just call out. What do you see? Person walking, right. So right now your brain is searching through a lifetime of past experience, issuing thousands of guesses at once, weighing probabilities, trying to answer the question, what is this most like? Not what is this, but what is this most like from the past? It's trying to remember, to reinstate ensembles of signals from the past that are similar in some way to the present. And if you only see black and white blobs, then your brain has not been able to construct a good set of predictions. And if you see, for example, like some people see a lobster or a chick or a person, then your brain is making predictions. But if all you see are black and white blobs, then your brain is in a state called experiential blindness. This is what philosophers call it. And so now, I'm going to cure you of your blindness. And this is my favorite part of this talk. Are you ready for me to cure your blindness? Can I get an amen? Amen? There we go. All right, here we go. So, as you can see, it's a bee. Has antenna and a shiny head and a furry body and a furry bum and shiny wings and spindly little legs. And now many of you see the blobs on the screen as a bee or part of a bee. Do you want me to do that again? Mm-hmm. Okay. So take a look at the parts of the bee. So here's a really cool thing. Has anything changed on the screen from the last time you saw these blobs? No. What's changed? You have changed. Yeah. Now your brain can create new predictions thanks to the color photograph that I just showed you. And those predictions change how you experience these blobs right now. So your brain is constructing the image of a bee or part of a bee, even though there's actually no bee present on the screen. And every experience you have works like this. It's a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present. This idea that every action you take and every experience you have is some combination of the remembered past and the sensory present is the third and final lesson for this evening. But I am, because I just can't resist, I am going to leave you with one final thought for you to chew on. If every experience you have is a combination of the signals in your brain and the signals coming from outside your brain, like your body and the outside world, so it's always a combination of those two, some combination, then can you ever experience the world objectively? Like, what does this even mean for the nature of reality? So one possibility is that there is an objective reality out there, which is separate from us, called perspective independent. It's completely separate from us. It's just that we can't ever assess it directly. We can never know it directly. And some very famous philosophers over the ages and many scientists held this view. But there is another possibility. It's a more radical possibility. And that is that reality itself is a combination of the remembered past and the sensory present. And that what we call objective reality doesn't exist in any meaningful sense. Now, this is not, reality is all in your head and we each get to have our own reality or anything like that. The idea that reality is all in your head is called idealism and has always been, in philosophy, it's always been seen as the opposite of realism, traditional realism, which is this idea of an objective reality out there. Here, what I'm suggesting is something different. The idea is that reality exists in relation to us. It's perceiver or perspective dependent. It's very, very counterintuitive, so I just want you to consider this. It's common sense to assume that an object like a flower exists in the world, in reality, separate from us. You can pick a flower, you can buy a flower, you can smell a flower, you sometimes can eat a flower. If you prick your finger on a rose, you'll bleed. Common sense tells us that flowers are objectively real, that this rose is objectively red, and that anyone who can't see this as red is colorblind. But maybe the reality of the red rose here depends on the kind of body we have, the kind of sensory surfaces we have, the kind of brain we have. Maybe the reality of the flower exists only in relation to us. So reality isn't out there, and it's not only in here, it's actually the relationship between the two. After all, to an ant, there is no flower per se, just terrain to climb. And to a whale, what we experience as a flower is just one of many irrelevant particles in the water. And if we were creatures of subatomic size, that flower would be mostly empty space. It wouldn't exist as a solid object in any meaningful sense to us. So to claim that a flower is part of one objective, perspective, independent reality is to really elevate one type of perceiver, that is neurotypical humans, and our biology over all other perceivers. And this kind of thinking, some philosophers wonder whether this kind of thinking is actually responsible for some of the conditions that deplete our body budgets, like climate change and so on. That we experience ourselves, we experience the world as objective and separate from us, and something we can manipulate and control. And as a consequence, we harm not only the planet but other animals along with the process, because we're sort of focused. There's a hidden condition to the reality that we experience, and that is, our own actual bodies and brains. And this is called the relational view of reality, or relational realism. It's the idea that reality exists in relation to us. Not that there are multiple realities, or that all of which are equally true, but there's one bona fide reality, but it's inherently perspective dependent and flexible, although not infinitely so. And I will leave you with that provocative thought, and thank you for your attention.